The morning began like any other on the small human colony at the edge of the star system. The sky was pale blue, dotted with distant gas giants, and the soft hum of the colony's energy grids filled the air. Children played near the central plaza, their laughter mingling with the quiet voices of adults tending to gardens and workstations. Among the children were Liam, a curious boy of 10 with a mischievous grin, Clara, a cautious but clever girl, Sophie, quiet and observant, and Ethan, energetic and always ready to try new things. Life was simple, predictable, and safe, or at least it had been until the day the aliens arrived. No one noticed them at first. The alien craft appeared like a shimmer on the horizon, a thin slice of silver light against the morning sky. It hovered silently, almost invisible, moving with a speed and grace that humans were not used to. Within moments, the children noticed the flicker of the craft, pointing and staring, but the adults were too busy with their daily routines to see what was happening. The aliens did not announce themselves. They did not land with banners or greetings. Instead, they moved with precision, their intentions hidden and deliberate. Suddenly the plaza seemed to change. A soft vibration ran through the ground. Children stopped mid-laugh, watching as the shimmering light seemed to expand. The aliens had already initiated their plan. Within seconds, force fields enveloped several children, including Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan. There was no struggle, only a brief moment of confusion and fear. The children were lifted gently but firmly into the craft, their feet no longer touching the ground. Liam gasped, clutching at Clara's hand, while Sophie's wide eyes scanned the strange interior around them. Ethan let out a small cry, but it quickly turned into a calm observation, trying to understand the unusual environment. Inside the alien ship, the environment was completely foreign. Walls were smooth and reflective, panels lit up with shifting symbols, and the air smelled faintly metallic. The children could see strange machines humming quietly, pulsing with energy they could not identify. There were no chairs or tables, only open space with subtle floor markings that guided movement. The aliens themselves were humanoid in shape but taller, with long limbs and skin that glimmered faintly under the lights. Their eyes were large, black, and unblinking. They spoke among themselves in a language the children could not understand, their tones sharp, precise, and commanding. Despite the fear, Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan did not panic. They had been raised in a colony that taught observation, quick thinking, and careful action. Liam whispered, "Stay calm. They won't hurt us if we don't panic." Clara nodded, clutching her small satchel close to her chest, while Sophie silently scanned the room for anything that could help. Ethan moved closer to Liam, leaning slightly to listen. The children quickly realized that understanding their captors was the first step to staying safe. Panic, they understood, would only make the situation worse. Back at the colony, the disappearance was noticed almost immediately. Anna, a skilled coordinator and one of the colony leaders, was tending the communication arrays when she saw the signal disappear from the monitoring grid. She froze for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "Children," she whispered, and immediately, her mind began racing through possibilities. Beside her, Ben, the deputy leader, looked equally concerned. "They're gone?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Anna nodded, her hands already moving across the consoles, sending signals to other monitors, alerting workers and checking every communication channel. The adults did not panic. Instead, they acted quietly and efficiently. Within minutes, a small team of colony members was mobilized to gather information. Drones were launched to follow the alien craft, sensors were activated to track energy signatures, and communication links were opened to alert neighboring colonies. Anna coordinated every action with precision, assigning roles to each member. Ben oversaw security and logistics, making sure the colony remained safe while focusing on the recovery effort. Every adult who remained on the ground knew the children were the priority, and every step taken was deliberate. Meanwhile, inside the alien craft, the children continued observing. Liam tested the boundaries of the force field gently, finding that it resisted most pushes but allowed small motions. Clara explored corners of the room, noting patterns in the lights and panels. Sophie studied the aliens' movements carefully, noticing that they always followed routines and seemed to respond to specific signals. Ethan, full of energy and curiosity, asked quiet questions of his friends, trying to figure out how everything worked. They quickly realized that their strength did not come from fighting, but from understanding. The aliens, confident in their plan, began documenting their subjects. They believed the children were simple and easy to study, assuming that fear and compliance would make the process effortless. Charts were made, observations recorded, and every behavior logged. They did not yet understand that the human children were far from simple. Even in the face of an entirely alien environment, the children remained alert, adaptive, and surprisingly cooperative with each other. This cooperation was not a weakness, it was strategy, instinct, and human resilience. Time passed slowly aboard the ship. The children learned to interpret the lights and sounds of the facility. Liam discovered that certain panels could be pressed without the aliens noticing, and small tools could be moved to different positions. Clara identified patterns in the aliens' patrols and signaling, noting moments when attention drifted. Sophie developed a system to communicate silently through gestures and slight movements, while Ethan used observation to predict how the aliens would respond to small actions. Together, they created an invisible network of information, quietly sharing knowledge without alerting their captors. Back at the colony, Anna and Ben worked tirelessly. They used old protocols, backup plans, and improvisation to track the craft. They knew the aliens underestimated humans, and they planned to use that to their advantage. The colony's adults coordinated with nearby settlements, sending messages and requesting assistance from friendly species they had encountered. Every person in the colony had a role, from monitoring to strategizing, and every decision was made with care. Their calm, organized approach mirrored the resilience of the children inside the alien craft. By the end of the first day, it became clear that neither side fully understood the other. The aliens assumed the children were helpless, the colony adults assumed the aliens could be tricked, and the children themselves realized that knowledge, observation, and quiet coordination were their best tools. Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan learned quickly that fear was useless, that cooperation was power, and that even small humans could make choices that mattered. As night fell on the colony, the alien craft glimmered against the stars, holding its human passengers silently. The children lay together on the smooth floor, discussing plans in whispers. "We need to watch everything," Liam said. "Every move, every light, every sound." Clara nodded, her eyes bright in the low glow. Sophie added quietly, "We can learn their rules. Then we can use them." Ethan grinned. "And maybe we can find a way home sooner than they think." Outside, Anna and Ben reviewed their progress, mapping possible paths and tracking energy signatures. Every step was calculated, precise, and careful. The colony's trust in their children gave them strength. They knew that the children were capable of clever thinking, and that every action taken today could affect the outcome tomorrow. The first part of the ordeal was over, but the real challenge, the interplay between human cunning, alien arrogance, and the bonds that tied the colony together, was only beginning. The children had been taken. The aliens had underestimated them. The colony had noticed immediately. And in those quiet hours of observation, learning, and planning, it became clear. Humans, even the youngest ones, were never as simple as they seemed. Every moment mattered. Every choice mattered. And no matter how strong the aliens believed themselves to be, they had yet to face the consequences of underestimating human ingenuity. The alien facility was unlike anything the children had ever seen. Smooth walls glowed with faint, shifting colors, and the floors hummed softly under their feet. Machines whirred and clicked in patterns that seemed random at first, but careful observation revealed order beneath the noise. The children, Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan, had quickly realized that to survive and maybe find a way back home, they needed to learn the patterns of the place. Fear would get them nowhere, but curiosity, focus, and cooperation could make them strong. Liam was the first to notice that the aliens moved on predictable schedules. Every few minutes, a taller figure with glimmering skin would pass through certain sections, pausing only briefly to check panels or consult with others. Their attention never lingered long on any single area, and they always repeated the same sequence of movements. "Look," Liam whispered to Clara, pointing to a passageway that had just been left empty. "We could slip past there if we time it right." Clara studied the movement carefully, her sharp eyes noting tiny differences in speed, how long each alien lingered near certain consoles, and even the slight pauses when they exchanged signals with machines. Sophie, ever observant, noticed patterns in the lighting. Certain panels would pulse faster when aliens approached, slowing when they left. "It's like a warning," she whispered to Ethan, who was bouncing slightly on his toes, full of energy and questions. "See? When that light blinks, they're paying attention." Ethan nodded, grinning. "So if we move when it slows, we can explore more." Together, they began quietly testing small movements, stepping carefully, observing reactions, and seeing what they could do without triggering alerts. At first, the aliens believed the children were simple and compliant. They assumed fear had rendered them passive. They documented each movement, each reaction, thinking the humans were learning from observation rather than creating strategies. One alien supervisor even commented on the efficiency of human learning, noting that it seemed natural and predictable for beings of that age. But the children were anything but passive. Every look, every gesture, and every whispered communication was part of a plan. They had not yet tried to escape, but they were learning, connecting, and testing their environment to find ways to bend the rules without breaking them. Communication was the first skill they developed. With no devices, they relied on gestures, whispers, and small signals. Liam would tap his foot lightly to indicate danger, Clara would tilt her head to point towards safe areas, Sophie would touch a panel in a specific order to mark a passage as clear, and Ethan would nod or shake his head to confirm understanding. It was quiet, invisible, and incredibly effective. The aliens, focused on what they believed were simple human reactions, failed to notice the web of signals being shared among the children. Exploration became their next priority. Liam discovered a vent system running along the walls. It was small and narrow, but he realized that with careful crawling, it could provide access to other parts of the facility. "We could get to the control room if we move through here," he whispered, testing the edges with his fingers. Clara measured spaces, checking if they could carry themselves or small items without being seen. Sophie noted patterns of sound, identifying sections where machines hummed more loudly to mask movement. Ethan experimented by dropping a small object on the floor to see if the sound would draw attention. Each small experiment added to their understanding. The aliens continued their routines, believing the children were compliant. They watched, measured, and recorded behaviors, convinced they were observing passive subjects. When the children moved in subtle ways, the aliens assumed it was random or a minor curiosity. They did not yet understand the children's intelligence, their focus, or their capacity to coordinate. Every attempt by the aliens to control the children's environment, from adjusting the lights to rearranging panels, was carefully studied by Liam and his friends. Every change became a clue, a tool, or a potential advantage. One day the aliens introduced a simple test. They provided toys and puzzles, expecting the children to interact in predictable ways. Liam examined the device, noticing the sequence of lights and sounds. He realized it was designed to teach obedience rather than creativity. Instead of following instructions, he explored the machine's components, noting patterns and weaknesses. Clara used her hands to manipulate hidden sections, discovering ways to alter its response. Sophie observed how the aliens recorded reactions, and Ethan began leaving small signals for the others, marking paths and noting safe areas. Their small acts of cleverness went unnoticed for hours. The aliens assumed any mistakes were accidental. Liam and Clara quietly shared information about doors, sensors, and lighting patterns. Sophie and Ethan tested small environmental cues, learning what could be moved, hidden, or delayed without triggering alarms. Step by step, they began mapping the facility mentally, creating a mental blueprint of exits, patrol routes, and observation points. In quiet moments, the children encouraged each other. "We can do this," Liam whispered as he traced his finger along a wall, memorizing patterns. Clara nodded. "We have to watch and wait. We learn first, act later." Sophie added, "We're already better than they think. They don't know we understand." Ethan grinned. "Then we'll surprise them someday. And they won't see it coming." Their courage came not from strength, but from calm focus, careful observation, and unspoken trust. The aliens, confident in their control, began scheduling feeding and exercise times, thinking they were teaching obedience. The children used these routines to gather information. They noted when doors were unlocked, how long machines cycled, and which sensors were less sensitive. They whispered notes to one another, always careful to remain unseen. They shared ideas quietly, learning from each experiment, each observation, each small act of bending the rules. Even as the children tested the limits of their environment, the aliens believed they were succeeding. They documented compliance, ignoring subtle signs of resistance or ingenuity. They assumed curiosity was simple and predictable. What they did not know was that Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan were not just learning, they were strategizing. Every move, every experiment, and every communication was a step toward understanding the facility, the aliens, and ultimately, the possibility of escaping. By the end of the first week, the children had built a clear picture in their minds. They knew patrol schedules, control panel patterns, and areas of weakness. They could communicate silently and coordinate movements with precision. They had learned to remain calm when the aliens approached, to appear compliant while gathering critical information. Most importantly, they had learned to trust each other completely. No one panicked, no one acted recklessly, and every choice was deliberate. The aliens continued their observation, unaware of the children's growing knowledge. They thought of the human children as small, fearful, and simple. They did not realize that each child was using intelligence, observation, and teamwork to challenge assumptions the aliens had believed unbreakable. The aliens assumed compliance, but the children were clever, adaptive, and more capable than anyone had expected. In quiet corners of the facility, Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan made plans. They whispered about potential routes, shared notes about the aliens' behavior, and imagined ways to use the information they had gathered. Each child contributed what they knew: Liam's courage and curiosity, Clara's careful observation, Sophie's silent intelligence, and Ethan's energy and quick thinking. Together they formed a small, unstoppable team. The facility, with all its advanced technology, its sensors and lights, its alien overseers, became a playground for the children's cleverness. And though the aliens still thought they controlled the situation, they were unaware that the human children were learning faster than they ever could anticipate. By the end of the week, the children had achieved a quiet mastery of their surroundings. They were no longer simply captives. They were observers, strategists, and collaborators. Their minds worked together like a single system, noticing patterns, predicting movements, and preparing for the day when they might act. They communicated secretly, tested boundaries, and discovered small ways to bend the rules, always careful not to provoke attention too early. The aliens still assumed compliance. They still believed the children were weak and simple. They did not understand that in human nature, even children carried the seeds of ingenuity, resilience, and cleverness. And in that quiet, humming, glowing facility, for human children began to show that intelligence and teamwork could make them a force even the most confident alien could not fully comprehend. The first lesson was clear: do not underestimate humans. The second lesson was slowly becoming clear to the aliens, but they would not fully realize it until later. And for the children, the day ended like any other inside the alien facility. Careful observation, whispered signals, shared smiles, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that even in captivity, they were never powerless. The aliens, frustrated by the children's quiet cleverness, decided that strict routines would finally give them control. They believed order and repetition could break human creativity, that repetition could suppress observation and initiative. Every day the children were assigned schedules: when to eat, when to rest, when to perform learning exercises, and even when to move from one room to another. The aliens thought that controlling every moment would make them compliant and predictable. At first the schedule seemed harmless. Breakfast was served at precise times, with carefully measured nutrition designed for human biology. Play and learning exercises were set with strict rules, each movement observed and recorded. The aliens believed that children, left with no choices, would eventually accept their situation as simple compliance. Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan quickly realized this was another challenge, not a restriction. They understood that routines could be used to their advantage to learn patterns, and to experiment in small ways without being noticed. Clara, who had a talent for noticing details, began hiding small tools she found around the facility. Some were left behind by aliens who thought them unimportant. Others were found in workrooms or storage areas. She hid them under panels, inside vents, and behind removable sections of walls. These tools were not weapons. They were small, harmless objects: a metallic pin, a piece of tubing, a lens, and thin wires. To the aliens they were nothing. To Clara, they were pieces of a puzzle that could help her group understand the environment better. Liam, always curious and daring, began exploring the ventilation systems. They were narrow, dark, and intimidating, but Liam moved carefully, learning their paths. He crawled silently, observing alien patrol patterns and testing where vents connected to rooms the children could not normally enter. Each exploration taught him more about the facility: which vents were monitored, which doors were automated, and which systems could be bypassed entirely. By the end of several days, Liam had mapped out an intricate network of hidden routes through the facility. Sophie and Ethan, working together, found ways to cause small, harmless disruptions. Sophie studied the lights and sensors, discovering that certain panels could be overloaded briefly without triggering alarms. Ethan, energetic and clever, would move small objects to create noises or diversions in different areas, drawing the aliens' attention while the others observed patterns or practiced small movements. Together they created temporary confusion, enough to test alien reactions and uncover weaknesses in the system. Every disruption was calculated, safe, and designed to avoid real harm. The aliens watched with growing frustration. Every time they adjusted a schedule, added new controls, or reprogrammed sensors, the children adapted within hours. The adults inside the control room began speaking more urgently, noting that the human children were somehow predicting their changes. One alien supervisor suggested stronger measures, but even their strictest routines failed to control the small humans. Each new rule exposed flaws: a sensor that could be tricked, a vent that led somewhere unmonitored, or a panel that allowed minor movement without detection. Clara's hidden tools became vital to the group. Liam retrieved a small lens that allowed him to peek into control room windows without being seen. Sophie and Ethan used a tiny metallic pin to manipulate simple buttons when no alien was watching. With these objects, they discovered weak points in the facility's security. They learned which doors could be left slightly open, which lights would not trigger alarms, and which paths allowed them to move unseen. Every success gave the children confidence and a sense of growing control over their environment. Meanwhile, the aliens escalated their attempts to enforce compliance. They introduced more frequent checks, automated monitoring, and complex drills meant to keep the children occupied. The schedule was relentless. Every day was mapped, monitored, and recorded in intricate logs. They assumed constant activity would limit human creativity. Instead, the children began to use these routines against them. Liam timed vent movements with meal distribution. Clara hid items during exercise periods. Sophie and Ethan created minor disruptions timed to coincide with system checks. What the aliens intended as control became opportunities for the children to learn even more about the facility's weaknesses. The children also observed each other carefully. They developed subtle signals to communicate without the aliens noticing. A tap on the floor meant wait. A tilt of the head meant move now. A small hand gesture indicated safe. By combining these signals with observations of the environment, the children moved as a coordinated team, anticipating each other's actions and preparing responses in advance. Even under strict routines, their teamwork remained flawless. One day, during a particularly intense monitoring session, the aliens tried a new tactic. They introduced a simulated problem, a false warning light in one section of the facility. They expected the children to panic, to reveal their limitations. Instead, Liam immediately assessed the area. Clara retrieved a hidden tool to examine the panel. Sophie studied the sequence of lights and Ethan listened for the hum of nearby machines. They discovered it was a false alarm and moved calmly to avoid detection. Not only did they avoid panic, but they also learned the trick the aliens had used to try and test them. Every failed attempt by the aliens revealed weaknesses in their own systems. Sensors were too slow to detect subtle movements. Panels had blind spots that children could exploit. Timed patrols allowed predictable movement through corridors. Routine schedules created patterns that could be anticipated. The aliens, confident in their control, began to realize that human children were not passive subjects. Their intelligence, adaptability, and ability to coordinate were far beyond the aliens' expectations. Outside the facility, Anna and Ben continued their planning. They observed energy signals, mapped the craft's movements, and coordinated with neighboring colonies. Every day they received minor signals, faint anomalies from the children's actions, that suggested the abducted humans were learning, adapting, and preparing. The adults were not surprised. They had always known humans, even children, could overcome challenges through observation, intelligence, and cooperation. Within the facility, the children continued to push boundaries carefully. Liam mapped new vent paths, Clara hid and recovered tools strategically, Sophie created subtle diversions, and Ethan exploited noises to mislead the aliens. Each day was a combination of observation, learning, and experimentation. They discovered more about the systems, how lights and doors reacted, and how aliens responded to unexpected events. Their confidence grew with each minor success. The aliens, despite their advanced technology, could not anticipate human ingenuity. They documented everything as compliance, thinking the children were responding out of fear or instinct. They did not understand subtle human reasoning, the ability to learn from mistakes, or the capacity to coordinate silently in a team. Every failed attempt at control reinforced the lesson the aliens were slowly beginning to grasp. Humans, even children, could not be easily controlled. By the end of the second week, the children had created a mental map of nearly the entire facility. They knew which doors could be opened and when, which patrols could be bypassed, and which panels could be manipulated. They had mastered communication and small tools, learned the limits of their environment, and developed patience. Every plan the aliens made to restrict them only made the children more capable, more observant, and more confident in their abilities. The strict routines intended to teach obedience had inadvertently taught the children strategy, coordination, and adaptation. Clara's hidden tools, Liam's vent explorations, Sophie and Ethan's disruptions, They had turned captivity into a classroom for human ingenuity. The aliens were failing and they did not yet understand why. Every attempt to control, monitor, or test the children only revealed more flaws in their own systems. The facility that was meant to hold them became a place for learning, observation, and preparation. Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan had adapted, quietly mastering the rules without ever breaking them dangerously. The aliens still assumed compliance, still believed the children were weak and simple. But in reality, the young humans were quietly teaching them a lesson about intelligence, strategy, and the consequences of underestimating even the smallest humans. By the third week, the children had achieved a remarkable level of control without ever being detected. They had tested the limits of the facility, understood patterns, and developed strategies for every possible contingency. Every alien measure, every rule, every schedule had failed to suppress their ingenuity. And though the aliens continued to believe they were in control, the truth was unmistakable. Humans, even children, were far more capable than the aliens could ever imagine. As the children gathered quietly in a corner of the facility one evening, Sophie whispered, "We know enough now." Liam nodded. "We can move if we need to." Clara added, "We've learned how everything works." Ethan smiled. "And they still don't know it." Together, they realized that intelligence, patience, and teamwork had made them more powerful than any technology the aliens had used to try and control them. And for the first time, the aliens began to sense that something was wrong, but it was already too late. The humans were not just surviving, they were thriving, learning, and proving that intelligence, adaptability, and cooperation could overcome even the strictest rules. By the fourth week in the alien facility, the children had moved beyond mere observation and small experiments. Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan had developed a system of coordination so precise that they could manipulate multiple elements of the facility at the same time. They had memorized patrols, vents, panels, and even the timing of lights and sensors. What had started as survival had become strategy. They were ready to disrupt operations in ways the aliens could not anticipate, and they could do it without causing real harm. The first disruption was simple but effective. During the aliens' scheduled system checks, the children coordinated movements to confuse the automated monitoring panels. Liam directed Ethan to move a small object along a corridor while Clara subtly adjusted a sensor cover. Sophie, observing the control room through a hidden vent, noted the reactions of the alien screens. Lights flickered, alerts briefly appeared, and alien staff rushed to the wrong locations. Nothing was damaged. No one was hurt. But the facility had been tested in a way the aliens had never imagined. Their systems were vulnerable to clever, patient human minds. This success encouraged the children. Each day they increased the complexity of their actions. Liam crawled through vents to access panels that controlled door locks. Clara used hidden tools to shift switches just enough to create minor delays in alien operations. Sophie and Ethan distracted the aliens with small but noticeable disturbances. A light turned on at an unexpected time, a door slightly ajar, a sound in a section that should have been silent. Every action was calculated, careful, and precise. The aliens assumed these disruptions were accidents or system errors. They did not realize they were facing human intelligence. The children also learned to combine their skills. Liam would enter the vents and signal when a corridor was clear. Clara would quietly move objects to test timing. Sophie observed and reported patterns through gestures. Ethan caused diversions when needed, drawing attention away from the others. The alien systems, designed for precision and control, were being manipulated without any violence. The children's teamwork had become more powerful than the technology surrounding them. One day, during a particularly complex disruption, the aliens began to notice something strange. A series of small errors had cascaded across the facility. Doors that should have locked remained open, lights flashed unexpectedly, and alarms triggered for seconds before turning off again. Alien supervisors tried to reassert control, issuing commands to repair systems and reroute power. But the more they intervened, the more unpredictable the facility became. The children's movements had created a chain reaction that highlighted weaknesses in every protocol the aliens had relied upon. Clara, whispering to the others, said, "They don't understand. Every time they fix one thing, it changes another. We just have to keep going." Liam nodded. "Exactly. We don't break anything. We just make it harder for them to predict us." Sophie added, "And they're learning consequences the hard way." Ethan grinned. "Let's show them what humans can do when we work together." The aliens were stunned. Their systems were failing, not completely but enough to create confusion, frustration, and a growing sense of unease. They began to realize that human children, beings they had considered weak and simple, could influence events in a facility designed to suppress individuality. Every action of the children, no matter how small, had consequences the aliens could not fully anticipate. For the first time, the aliens understood that intelligence and cooperation could outweigh technology, power, and strict control. The children's disruptions continued. Liam guided movements through vents, taking care to avoid detection. Clara carefully adjusted equipment to slow systems without causing damage. Sophie monitored the alien reactions and signaled the others when new opportunities arose. Ethan created minor distractions at critical moments, ensuring that the aliens focused on the wrong areas. The combined effect was a controlled, ongoing disruption of operations, demonstrating that humans could manipulate the environment in ways the aliens had never considered. Even the alien leadership began to recognize the lesson unfolding before them. They had assumed that fear and technology could dominate human behavior. They had assumed compliance. Now, they were learning that the smallest humans could create significant effects without force or aggression. Intelligence, teamwork, and careful observation mattered more than power or weapons. The children's quiet actions were teaching the aliens the importance of consequences, how even minor actions could ripple outward to create major effects. Outside the facility, Anna and Ben monitored signals from the alien ship. They noticed unusual activity, small fluctuations that indicated the children were influencing systems in unexpected ways. Anna smiled. "They're doing it," she said quietly. "They're working together. They're making them see what consequences really mean." Ben nodded. "They always do. Humans think differently even at this age. The aliens won't know what hit them." Inside the facility, the children began planning larger coordinated actions. They still avoided danger and avoided harming anyone. Their goal was not revenge or destruction. It was to show that even in captivity, intelligence and teamwork could prevail. They experimented with new methods, signaling from vents, adjusting panels in sequence, timing movements with patrols, and creating patterns that forced the aliens to respond in ways that exposed flaws in their control. Every disruption was deliberate, precise, and safe. The aliens tried to counteract. They adjusted schedules, added sensors, increased monitoring. But with each adjustment, the children adapted. Liam's vent explorations allowed them to bypass new sensors. Clara's hidden tools helped manipulate panels. Sophie's observations guided precise timing. Ethan's diversions drew attention away from critical areas. The aliens' attempts at control were proving ineffective, highlighting a critical lesson they had ignored. Humans, even children, could act with foresight, strategy, and coordination. One day, the disruptions became visible in the control room. Several systems triggered alerts simultaneously. The aliens rushed to respond, but nothing catastrophic had occurred. Doors opened and closed incorrectly. Lights blinked in patterns that didn't match commands. Panels seemed to reset themselves. Every response by the aliens revealed another weak point. They were beginning to understand that consequences existed naturally when human intelligence interacted with technology, and these consequences could not be predicted by simple rules or rigid routines. The children observed all of this quietly. They did not celebrate. They simply noted the results, adjusted their plans, and prepared for the next opportunity. Liam whispered, "Every time they react, we learn more." Clara nodded. "And they're learning too without realizing it." Sophie added, "Consequences are teaching them something they didn't expect." Ethan grinned. "And it's exactly what we hoped for." By the end of the week, the alien facility was in subtle disarray. Nothing was broken, no one was hurt, but every system had been tested, every schedule disrupted, every control moment challenged. The day the children were returned began quietly, almost unexpectedly. After weeks in the alien facility, Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan were gathered together in a large observation chamber. The walls glimmered with the same smooth, cold light that had been their constant companion for so long, but this time the atmosphere was different. The aliens, those same beings who had once assumed humans, especially children, were weak and simple, now stood around with a kind of hesitant respect. The youngest humans had changed the aliens' understanding of intelligence, strategy, and consequences, and even the aliens themselves seemed aware of the lessons they had learned. Anna and Ben, the colony leaders, were waiting outside, coordinating a careful retrieval. They had been tracking the alien craft, following energy signatures, and sending signals that would allow the aliens to safely return the children. The plan was precise. No sudden movements, no unnecessary risks, and no confrontation. The humans had learned to expect unpredictability from the aliens, and the aliens in turn had been forced to acknowledge human cleverness in the previous weeks. It was a delicate balance. When the chamber doors opened, the children stepped forward cautiously. Liam's eyes scanned the room, noting the familiar signs of their environment, and then immediately shifted to the exit. Clara stayed close to him, holding her satchel of carefully collected tools and notes, each item representing knowledge she had gained. Sophie's gaze was quiet but alert, noticing every detail from the angles of alien lights to subtle movements in the room. Ethan, usually full of energy and excitement, walked calmly, aware that every step mattered. Together, they moved as a team, quietly confident in their ability to navigate the final part of this experience. The aliens who had overseen them stepped back. There were no words of congratulations or warnings, only observation. They had witnessed what these human children had accomplished: intelligence, observation, adaptability, and teamwork. They had seen systems disrupted without destruction, schedules bent without breaking rules, and consequences unfold naturally from careful action. The aliens had learned, perhaps for the first time, that human strength was not measured in force or size, but in wit, trust, and collaboration. As the children were escorted toward the waiting shuttle, Liam paused to glance at the facility one last time. "We didn't hurt anyone," he whispered to Clara. "We just showed them what we can do." Clara nodded, a faint smile on her face. "And maybe they'll remember it." Sophie, walking beside Ethan, added quietly, "They'll have to remember it." Ethan, always the optimist, grinned. "And next time they won't underestimate humans." The shuttle itself was sleek, designed to minimize any friction or disturbance during transport. Inside, the children were reunited with familiar faces: Anna, Ben, and several other colony members who had been coordinating the operation. Relief was visible in every face, though words were few. The reunion was quiet, as if everyone understood the weight of the experience without needing to say it aloud. Hugs were exchanged, hands held, and for a moment, the terror of the previous weeks faded into a calm sense of accomplishment. As the shuttle moved away from the alien craft, the children looked back. The aliens remained in the observation chamber, silent and motionless. They had no idea what to say, how to express the lesson they had just learned. In their careful notes and calculations, they had recorded every movement, every choice, every pattern of behavior. Yet none of their data could fully capture the subtlety of human intelligence, the strength of trust between children, or the power of teamwork. It was something that could not be quantified, only experienced, and the aliens had experienced it. Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan began speaking quietly among themselves, reflecting on what they had learned. "We've seen how they think," Liam said. "And we've seen how far we can go without them noticing." Clara added, "It's not about breaking things. It's about understanding them." Sophie nodded. "And using that understanding to stay safe, to plan, to cooperate." Ethan grinned, "And maybe teach them a lesson quietly without anyone getting hurt." Back at the colony, life slowly returned to normal. Gardens were tended, workstations operated, and routines resumed. Yet something subtle had changed. The adults, who had watched their children from afar, knew that the experience had transformed them. Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan were no longer just ordinary children. They were careful observers, clever strategists, and examples of human adaptability. The colony understood that human potential was more than physical strength. It was the ability to think ahead, to trust each other, and to act together in ways that could influence outcomes far beyond what anyone expected. The aliens too had changed, though they might not have fully realized it yet. In their reports, they noted unexpected behaviors, intelligence beyond assumed limits, and coordination that had disrupted systems without causing harm. They tried to describe it in terms of data, response times, pattern recognition, and cooperation metrics. Yet even they knew that the numbers could not capture the real lesson. Humans, even children, were capable of far more than their initial assumptions allowed. The aliens had learned, in a subtle but undeniable way, that consequences were real and that even the smallest humans could create them. For Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan, the return home was quiet. They ate together, slept safely in familiar beds, and walked among the familiar spaces of their colony. Yet they had changed. Their eyes were sharper, their thinking faster, and their confidence in working together stronger than ever. They had faced something unknown, adapted, and succeeded without violence. They had demonstrated that intelligence, cooperation, and careful observation mattered more than brute force, rules, or technology. The colony too took note. Adults praised the children quietly, without exaggeration. They recognized that the children's actions had been clever, safe, and impactful. There was no need for celebration or ceremony. The lesson was already clear. Humans, even young humans, could influence outcomes, understand complex systems and act with foresight. Trust, observation and cooperation were more powerful than control, surveillance or even technology. Weeks passed and the alien craft departed from the system. The beings who had once underestimated the children carried with them reports, logs and data. Yet no record could truly convey the lessons they had learned. Even in their calculations and observations, the aliens had to acknowledge that the humans they had taken were far more capable than expected. In a universe where power often measured worth, the aliens had discovered that intelligence, trust and cooperation could outweigh technology, force and control. Liam, Clara, Sophie and Ethan resumed life in their colony quietly. They played, learned and interacted as children normally would, but there was a new layer of understanding in their actions. They knew how to observe, communicate silently and plan. They had learned the value of working together, thinking ahead and testing limits carefully. Their experience in the alien facility had strengthened them, not only in skill but in confidence and trust in each other. The aliens, far away, recorded their findings, updating logs, revising reports, and noting the consequences of underestimating humans. They may have continued to see humans as small and vulnerable in some ways, but they could never again assume weakness. Even children could create ripples of impact far beyond what anyone expected. And so, life returned to normal or as close to normal as it could be. The children learned that intelligence, patience and cooperation could overcome even the most rigid control. The adults learned to trust the cleverness and resilience of their youngest members. And the aliens, who had believed they could manipulate and control, were left with an enduring lesson about consequences, strategy, and the unpredictable strength of humanity. Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan continued their daily lives quietly. They laughed, played, and learned with their friends. They still helped their families and contributed to the colony. Yet beneath the ordinary routines, there remained a deeper understanding of their own power. The power of observation, the strength of trust, the value of teamwork, and the ability to face challenges with intelligence and calm. The aliens, far from the human colony, would remember the children. Not as captives, not as specimens, but as teachers of an essential truth. Strength is not always visible. It does not come from size or tools or force alone. Strength can come from intelligence, from careful planning, and from the ability to act together with trust and cooperation. In the quiet of the colony, as the sun set over distant planets and the wind whispered softly through the habitats, Liam, Clara, Sophie, and Ethan returned to life as children. They did not boast, they did not brag, they did not need to. Their actions had already spoken. And far away, the aliens carried with them a lesson they would never forget. Underestimating humans, no matter how small or young, could have consequences far beyond what they imagined. The children had returned. Life resumed. And the universe, in its vast expanse, had learned something new about humanity.